What's up guys, Sean here, and I just have to say, Rice Krispie cereal, not that good. In fact, it's pretty terrible. In fact, if you're not buying Rice Krispie cereal to make your own homemade Rice Krispies treats, I don't know what you're doing, because it does not work as a cereal whatsoever. So today's video is a long time coming. Over the course of the history of this channel, I've made a lot of videos about TYT, about the Young Turks, about Cenk Uygur, and all the cast of characters that make up that news organization. And occasionally, I will get comments on those videos saying, look, I know Cenk Uygur or whatever TYT person is a dumb idiot, but at least they are on point about money and politics. If there's one thing that TYT gets right, it's money and politics. Cenk Uygur may be a dum-dum, but money and politics, 100%, he knows what's up with that issue, and that's the one thing I support him on, because that's the most important issue. Well, that's what we're going to refute today, because as a general rule, and I think this should be obvious, you shouldn't let somebody who can't tell the difference between their forearm and their upper arm rewrite the Constitution.
A sixth shot that hit the forearm traveled from the back of the arm to the inner arm, which means Brown's palms could not have been facing Wilson, as some witnesses have said. He couldn't have had his hands up, as people were claiming, because it entered from the back of his arm and came out the front of his arm.
But before we get into that, I know, I'm wearing a t-shirt from my Teespring store. Links in the description to the Teespring store. If you use the promo code DUMBPROMO, you can get 10% off anything in my store, because everything is better with a dumb promotion. Now, by the end of this video, you will have a complete overview of Cenk Uygur's organization Wolfpack. You will have an understanding of what he actually means when he says he's going to amend the Constitution, supposedly to get money out of politics. But the first thing that we have to do before we get into the organization itself is talk about the foundation of the organization, because there are two things at play here that are so often misunderstood. The myth is far more popular than the truth could ever be. And that is corporate personhood and Citizens United. Now we're going to start with corporate personhood because I said it first, and I want you to feel like there's some continuity and structure in this video. Now it is extremely popular among leftists and just people in general across the country to say something to the effect of, corporations aren't people. Corporations not equal to human beings. Corporate person people, you think Exxon person, you a dumb idiot. Now the reason this is said all the time is, pure ignorance if we're being perfectly honest. But one of the other reasons that this is said all the time is because it's meant to give the impression that there is somebody on the other side of this issue. That somewhere out there are people, possibly Republicans or conservatives, that believe that Apple is a human person, or ExxonMobil is a human being, when nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, considers that to be the case. In fact, nowhere in law are corporations considered to be human beings. However, for various legal reasons, corporations in the United States and across the world are granted a legal standing known as personhood, specifically corporate personhood. Now, you might think that corporate personhood is the same thing as saying that corporations are people and corporations are human beings, but it's not. People are human beings, we all understand that, and corporations are granted personhood for legal convenience. That's it. And to give you a quick example to explain this convenience, let's say me, somebody named David, and somebody named Sarah, because we need a woman in the boardroom, because companies are way better when they have women in the boardroom, all decide to form a company, and we're all 1/3 owners of that company. Now let's say we decide that we're going to buy a building to have our company's headquarters in. Now we could all go down and sign the paperwork necessary in order for us to buy that building. It's just 3 of us. It's not that big of a deal. Obviously, we have a very small company, so it wouldn't be too difficult for all 3 of us to go downtown, fill out the paperwork in order to have that property and have it owned by each of us in a 1/3 value. But let's say our company is really successful. We bring on 2 more people, and now we're all 1/5 owners of the company. And eventually it gets so successful that we decide to take the company public and start selling shares of stock in that company to millions of people across the country. And we decide that we want to move to a bigger headquarters. Now all of a sudden, it becomes a little bit more difficult for all of us to get together in the same place and all sign the paperwork necessary in order to sell our old headquarters, much less buy a brand new headquarters. In fact, even if we decided to stay in the same headquarters, if we had to change the names on all of our paperwork every time somebody bought and sold stock, we would never be able to get anything done because people buy and sell stock so quickly that that would be the only thing that our company could do. It's just change names and percentages of ownership on this one building that our company owns. So because this is a dumb, really inefficient way to do business, rather than go through all of that, what we now do in our society is we create a corporation and we use the name of the corporation to handle all the transactions because it's just one name, it represents the company on paper and legally, and it's way easier for us to understand and it's way more efficient throughout our economy. And that is why on paper, corporations are considered legal persons. Again, not people, legal persons. Now you might be saying, Sean, okay, I get it. That is a legal person on paper, but that legal person on paper should not have any of the constitutional rights that actual people have. And while that might make sense to you in the beginning, it actually doesn't follow at all. Because the reason that all of these people have come together under this one banner is for convenience. Now, it would be incredibly inconvenient if all of these people who have constitutional rights, who have Bill of Rights protections, to come together to form something that doesn't have constitutional rights and doesn't have Bill of Rights protection. I mean, think about it. If by the mere act of forming a corporation, which is just a group of people coming together under a common name to make legal things more convenient, you then forfeit your constitutional rights, nobody would do that because forfeiting your constitutional rights would mean that the federal government or any government agency could waltz into your property whenever they want. They can take anything that they want. And there's no way that you can do business under those circumstances if you know that any government official at any time can seize anything that you own without any due process rights. Now, I'm not going to harp too much on this because I'm sure you can all understand where I'm coming from just based on the example that I gave you. And I want to now move on to Citizens United. Now, Citizens United was a Supreme Court decision that allegedly, according to the media, declared corporations people, said that corporations can spend unlimited money in politics, and said that some other crazy leftist conspiracy nonsense. Now, in reality, the Citizens United decision overturned a law called McCain-Feingold, which was a campaign finance law that was so stringent and strict that when it was passed, the ACLU opposed the law. McCain-Feingold, among other things, capped what they considered to be outside spending on elections within a certain period of the election date actually occurring. For primaries, I believe it was 30 days out from an election, and from a general election, it was 60 days out from that general election. Now, we're not officially in primary season right now, but once primary season kicks off, you realize how stringent a 30-day cap on whether or not you can spend telling people what you think about politics actually is, because all of our primaries, for the most part in this country, are spaced out over the course of months. And you can't spend within 30 days over a certain limit on any of those elections or messaging in any of those elections. So effectively, McCain-Feingold silenced political speech leading up to the presidential election for over a year. In fact, the law was so strict and draconian that McCain-Feingold actually had to carve out a special exemption for what is known as media companies, specifically news companies, which we're going to touch on in a little bit. Now, a lot of you are going to listen to what I'm saying and you're going to say, Sean, look, I don't want money in politics, even if it is a 30-day cap. I actually don't think it went far enough because corporations shouldn't be allowed to spend anything in politics. Special exemption for media corporations, that's fine. But every other corporation, no way. Not cool at all. Can't have it. And I would respond to that by asking if you consider art to be something that is protected by the First Amendment. And most people would respond to that by saying yes. And I would also ask if you believe that movies are protected by the First Amendment, or do you think that the government should be able to ban any movie that it likes, even if the movie only contains one line of dialogue that the federal government objects to. Now, a lot of people would say, Sean, of course movies are protected speech. Don't be ridiculous. Well, that was the entire basis of the Citizens United case. Citizens United was a production company that made a movie about Hillary Clinton that the FEC said that they were not allowed to show because they thought it would be interference in the election. Citizens United answered the question of whether or not the government could ban a movie or an art form based on the fact that people in the government didn't like the political speech in that movie or art form.
So Wolfpack's doing a film about corruption because obviously our politicians, our representatives, even the good guys, are not talking about corruption nearly enough.
I remember that media exemption that I talked about where I said that the McCain-Feingold law was so strict that it had to carve out a special exemption for the news media. Well, the Supreme Court also examined this exemption and the absurd realities that this exemption actually put forward into our campaign finance laws. Now, to give you a quick example to illustrate this point, the FEC was taking the position that a production company producing a movie was not considered protected political speech in the lead up to an election. However, a company like NBC, which was owned by the mega corporation General Electric, could do whatever it wanted, spend unlimited amounts of money on their network to try and influence the election. Which leads us to this absurd reality where NBC Universal cannot do specific things depending on which part of the company is doing it. So Universal Studios cannot put out a movie with even one line of political dialogue endorsing or condemning a political candidate, but NBC, the news agency, can do whatever it wants. That's completely absurd. So according to this law, it would be perfectly acceptable for NBC Universal to air a 2-hour news documentary on political candidates where they endorse or support political candidates, or whether they don't endorse and they're trying to put down political candidates. But Universal couldn't put that same exact movie in a theater because that would be considered election interference. This is why, contrary to popular belief, the Supreme Court did not rule money is speech and that corporations could spend unlimited money in politics. The Supreme Court just ruled that the First Amendment, of course, protects political speech. It's designed to protect political speech. And everyone, not just designated approved companies, can engage in that political speech. And political speech is way more important in the lead up to an election, so the government can't ban political speech depending on the time. The question of whether or not money is essential to speech is not something that was under debate. In fact, it was assumed to be true by not only the majority ruling in this case, but also by the dissent. Of course you need money to get your speech out there. Remember Thomas Paine and how he published a bunch of pamphlets to get his message out to gin up support for the American Revolution? If you would have said that the publishing company could only publish a certain amount of pamphlets in order to not cost more than a certain amount of money, of course that would have been an infringement on his freedom of speech. I mean, it's completely absurd to limit random citizens' ability to spend money on politics to the same limit as if they were giving to a political campaign when they're not giving to a political campaign, when they're just telling you what they think about politics. I mean, let's say the campaign contribution limit is $5,000 and I, not connected with either candidate, want to spend money to buy a billboard. How is me spending money to buy the billboard considered protected free speech if I spend $5,000, but considered election interference if I spend $5,001 on the same exact billboard? Now, I understand that some of you still might not be convinced. You're not convinced by the fact that the ACLU supported the Citizens United decision, along with every other free speech organization across the country. But I want to move on to Cenk Uygur's organization, Wolfpack, because Cenk Uygur, when he heard about Citizens United, he was not having it. And in fact, he decided that he was going to form a pack to end all packs, and this would be Wolfpack. And Wolfpack wants to go across the country and trigger an Article 5 convention through the state legislatures in order to get money out of politics. And I'm told by a lot of people that this is a noble endeavor, and whatever you want to say about Cenk Uygur, whatever you want to say about the Young Turks, he is right about this issue, and Wolfpack's mission is just and amazing.
Mic check!
Mic check!
I'm Cenk Uygur.
I'm Cenk Uygur!
Of the Young Turks!
Of the Young Turks!
I have an announcement.
I have an announcement.
Tonight, we're going to start a fight to take back our democracy. Our politicians are bought. Who bought them? The corporations did. Corporations are not immoral. They have no morality. Corporations are profit-making machines. We must not let the machines take over our government.
Now, we all know that Wolfpack is proposing a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics, and a lot of people across the political spectrum, across the board, and I'm sure a lot of people in my audience think that this is a noble endeavor, and I know I'm like tongue-in-cheek talking about how amazing it is, but in reality, this is a widely held belief by the American people that this is a good idea. Which brings me to the most logical question that nobody seems to be asking. What is the text of the constitutional amendment that the Young Turks and Wolfpack are proposing? So I searched across the internet, and for some reason, the text of the amendment has been removed from Wolfpack's website. Now, call me crazy, but if you want to put forward an amendment to the Constitution, an amendment which, by the way, is meant to overturn a Supreme Court decision that strengthened the First Amendment, I want to know what that amendment says before I sign up and decide that I'm going to be an advocate for it. I don't think that's unreasonable, do you? Now, while Wolfpack does not have the constitutional amendment text on their website, that doesn't mean that they never had the amendment text on their website. In fact, long-term viewers of the Young Turks might have checked this out years ago, and that amendment might have sounded so absurd to them that they actually memorized the text, and those people might be able to Google the exact wording of the text to find it on other documents across the internet. If you can't tell, I do in fact have the text to the constitutional amendment that Cenk Uygur, Wolfpack, and the Young Turks are proposing to add to our Constitution. And it reads as follows. Corporations are not people. They have none of the constitutional rights of human beings. Corporations are not allowed to give money to any politician, directly or indirectly. No politician can raise over $100 from any person or entity. All elections must be publicly financed. Yes, this is the text of the amendment that Wolfpack decided to go with, and were so embarrassed by it that they actually had to pull off their website. This is what people are telling me is the one good thing about Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks, is that he started Wolfpack and he's trying to get money out of politics. That amendment is so broad, so poorly written, that it actually repeals every one of the Bill of Rights, depending on circumstances. Corporations aren't people, they have none of the rights of human beings, which means that the government could seize anything from any company at any moment. They could search any company's place of business without a warrant, and also because Cenk Uygur, the Young Turks, and Wolfpack weren't smart enough to carve out an exemption for the mainstream media, this actually repeals all press freedoms. The First Amendment does not apply to the mainstream media. The government can compel them to carry whatever message that they want. The Young Turks is a limited liability company. Cenk Uygur is stripping all of the rights of his own company because he's a buffoon. And by the way, I'm sure a lot of you might think that this is some sinister plot since the Young Turks has thrown their support behind Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders is a socialist, and a key component of socialism is the death of private property rights. But I assure you, this is pure stupidity. It's not malice. Always attribute to stupidity before you attribute something to malice. I mean, seriously, this amendment is so poorly written, they cap contributions to $100. Not $100 adjusted for inflation, $100, whatever that is worth, from now to the end of time. Also, indirect and direct contributions are limited to $100. You know what you can do besides giving money to politicians? You can volunteer your time, donate your labor to a campaign. And the Young Turks and their favorite candidate, Bernie Sanders, values labor at a minimum of $15 an hour, which means that this ridiculous constitutional amendment, which caps direct and indirect contributions to political candidates, just capped volunteering time at about 6 hours and 40 minutes. Also, have you ever wanted to have a political candidate speak at a venue for you? Well, it turns out that would be a contribution that exceeds $100 directly or indirectly, so it can't happen. Hey, remember when all those estimates came out and they said that Donald Trump received $2 billion in free media coverage from the mainstream media? Well, I don't know if you know this, but nowhere in this where it says that corporations have none of the rights of human beings is there an exemption for media companies. It doesn't exist. And $2 billion, a little bit more than the indirect value of $100 unadjusted for inflation forever that you're actually allowed to give to political candidates. So that's completely illegal. So the media can't even cover candidates under the broad, childlike language put forward in this constitutional amendment. Now, I know a lot of you might think I'm being a little bit hyperbolic at this point, but honestly, this was the text that they put forward. At one point, maybe it's not true now, this is what they wanted to add to our Constitution. Even if I didn't believe that Cenk Uygur, the Young Turks, and a large portion of the country aren't completely wrong about the Citizens United decision and this need to overturn it, there's no way I could support something like this. And there's no way I could support people this ignorant and this buffoonish when this is something that they wanted to propose to add to our Constitution. Now, I don't think it's too much to ask for somebody who's organizing a pact to amend the Constitution, to amend the Bill of Rights of our United States Constitution, to run the text of the proposed amendment by a single constitutional lawyer, by a law student. I mean, anybody who looked at this text and thought that this was a brilliant idea needs to have their head examined. So to those bitter clingers in the comments who acknowledge that Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks are a buffoonish organization that is incapable of getting basic facts right, but somehow think that they should be able to put forward an amendment to the United States Constitution, you're dead wrong. Through pure buffoonery, if this were to pass, it would repeal most of the rights outlined in the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. Anyway, that's all I really have for you guys today. Let me know what you think about this down in the comments below. Maybe you disagree with me and you think we should support Cenk Uygur's effort to accidentally repeal the Bill of Rights. Tell me in the comments down below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias. You can support me by buying a t-shirt or through one-time donations on Venmo or PayPal, or monthly through Patreon or Subscribestar. This has been me talking about Wolfpack because it was long overdue. Till next time.